The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service was the air arm of the Imperial Japanese Navy during World War II. The organization was responsible for the operation of naval aircraft and the conduct of aerial warfare in the Pacific War. It was controlled by the Navy Staff of the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Navy Ministry. The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service was equal in function to the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, the Italian Navy's Aviazione Navale, or the Soviet Navy's Morskaya Aviatsiya. The Imperial Japanese Navy Aviation Bureau of the Ministry of the Navy of Japan was responsible for the development and training. The Japanese military acquired the first aircraft in 1910 and followed the development of air combat during World War I with great interest. They initially procured European aircraft but quickly built their own and launched themselves onto an ambitious aircraft carrier building program. They launched the world's first purpose-built aircraft carrier, Hosho, in 1922. Afterwards they embarked on a conversion program of several excess battle cruisers and battleships into aircraft carriers. The IJN Air Service had the mission of national air defense, deep strike naval warfare, and so forth. It retained this mission to the end. The Japanese pilot training program was very selective and rigorous, producing a high-quality and long-serving pilot corps, who ruled the air in the Pacific during early World War II. However, the long duration of the training program, combined with a shortage of gasoline for training, did not allow the Navy to rapidly provide qualified replacements in sufficient numbers. Moreover, the Japanese, unlike the US or Britain, proved incapable of altering the program to speed up training of the recruits they got. The resultant decrease in quantity and quality, among other factors, resulted in increasing casualties toward the end of the war. Japanese Navy aviators, like their Army counterparts, preferred maneuverable aircraft, leading to lightly built but extraordinarily agile types, most famously the A6M0, which achieved its feats by sacrificing armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. History. Origins. In 1912, the Royal Navy had informally established its own flying branch, the Royal Naval Air Service. The Japanese admirals, whose own navy had been modeled on the Royal Navy and whom they admired, themselves proposed their own Naval Air Service. The Japanese Navy had also observed technical developments in other countries and saw that the airplane had potential. The following year, in 1913, a Navy transport ship, the Wakamiya, was converted into a seaplane tender. A number of aircraft were also purchased. Siege of Tsingtao on the 23rd of August 1914. As a result of its treaty with Great Britain, Japan declared war on Germany. The Japanese, together with a token British force, then laid siege to the German-held territory of Kiaochao and its administrative capital Tsingtao on the Shandong Peninsula. During the siege, starting from September, Morris Farman seaplanes on board the Wakamiya conducted reconnaissance and aerial bombardments on German positions and ships. On the 30th of September, the Wakamiya was later damaged by a mine, but the seaplanes continued to be used against the German defenders until the surrender on the 7th of November 1914. The Wakamiya conducted the world's first naval-launched aerial raids in history and was in effect the first aircraft carrier of the Imperial Japanese Navy. By the end of the siege, the aircraft had conducted 50 sorties and dropped 200 bombs, although damages to German defenses were light. Intra-war years, the Japanese Navy had closely monitored the progress of aviation of the three Allied naval powers during World War I and concluded that Britain had made the greatest advances in naval aviation. The Semple mission was a British aeronaval technical mission led by Captain Semple and sent to Japan in September 1921, with the objective of helping the Imperial Japanese Navy develop its aeronaval forces. The mission consisted in a group of 29 British instructors, headed by Captain William Semple, and stayed in Japan for 18 months. The British government hoped it would lead to lucrative an arms deal. The Japanese were trained on several British aircraft, such as the Gloucester Sparrowhawk, in various techniques such as torpedo bombing, flight control and carrier landing and takeoffs, skills that would later be employed in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The mission also brought the plans of the most recent British aircraft carriers, such as the HMS Argus and the HMS Hermes, which influenced the final stages of the development of the carrier Hosho. The Hosho became the first designed aircraft carrier from the keel up to be built. The military in Japan were also aided in their quest to build up the naval forces by Semple, who had become a Japanese spy. Over the next 20 years, the British peer provided the Japanese with secret information on the latest British aviation technology. His espionage work helped the Japanese rapidly develop its military aircraft and its technologies before the Second World War. Under the Washington Naval Treaty, two incomplete battle cruisers were allowed to be rebuilt as carriers for the Japanese, the Akagi and the Amagi. However, the Amagi was damaged during an earthquake in 1923 and the Kaga became a replacement. With these two carriers, much of Imperial Japanese Navy's doctrines and operating procedures were established. Sino-Japanese War. From the onset of hostilities in 1937 until forces were diverted to combat the Americans in 1941. The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service played a key role in military operations on the Chinese mainland. Despite the fierce rivalry between military branches, in the fall of 1937 General Matsuya Iwani, the Army general in command of the theater, admitted the superiority of the Naval Air Services. His combat troops relied on the Navy for air support. Aircraft attacked Chinese positions in Shanghai and surrounding areas. Naval bombers such as the Mitsubishi G3M and Mitsubishi G4M were used to bomb Chinese cities. Japanese fighter planes, notably the Mitsubishi Zero, gained tactical air superiority. Control of the skies over China belonged to the Japanese. Unlike other naval air forces, the IJNAS was responsible strategic bombing and operated long-ranged bombers. The Japanese strategic bombing were mostly done against Chinese big cities, such as Shanghai, Wuhan and Chongqing, with around 5,000 raids from February 1938 to August 1943. The bombing of Nanjing and Guangzhou, which began on 22 and the 23rd of September 1937, called forth widespread protests culminating in a resolution by the Far Eastern Advisory Committee of the League of Nations. Lord Cranborne, the British Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, expressed his indignation in his own declaration. World War II. At the beginning of the Pacific War, the Navy Air Service consisted of 5 naval air fleets. In April 1941, the first air fleet was created, concentrating the Navy's carriers into a single powerful striking unit. The Japanese had a total of 10 aircraft carriers, 6 fleet carriers, 3 smaller carriers, and 1 training carrier. The 11th Air Fleet contained most of the Navy's land-based strike aircraft. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy attacked Pearl Harbor, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet by destroying over 188 aircraft and only losing 29 of their own aircraft. On December 10, land-based bombers of the 11th Air Fleet were also able to sink HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse. There were also air raids on the Philippines and Darwin in northern Australia. In these battles, the Japanese veterans of the Chinese War did well against inexperienced against Allied pilots flying obsolescent aircraft. However, their advantage did not last. In the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Battle of Midway, and again in the Guadalcanal campaign, the Japanese lost many veteran pilots, because the Japanese pilot training program was unable to increase its production rate. Those veterans could not be replaced. Meanwhile, the American pilot training program went from strength to strength. The American aircraft industry rapidly increased production rates of new designs that rendered the Japanese opponents obsolescent. Examination of crash-to-captured Japanese aircraft revealed that they achieved the superior range and maneuverability by doing without cockpit, armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. Flight tests showed that they lost maneuverability at high speeds. American pilots were trained to take advantage of these weaknesses. The outdated Japanese aircraft and poorly trained pilots suffered great losses in any air combat for the rest of the war, particularly in the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. In the Battle of Leyte Gulf a few months later, the 1st Air Fleet was used only as a decoy force to draw the main American fleet away from Leyte. The remnants of Japanese naval aviation were then limited to land-based operations, increasingly characterized by kamikaze attacks on American invasion fleets. For the 16th of December 1941 to the 20th of March 1945, IJN aviation casualties killed were 14,242 aircrew and 1,579 officers. The IJNAS had over 3,089 aircraft in 1941 and 370 trainers. 1,830 first-line aircraft including 660 fighters, 350 Mitsubishi Zeros, 330 carrier-based strike aircraft, 240 land-based twin-engined bombers, 520 seaplanes and flying boats. World War II aircraft. Fighters: Mitsubishi A-5M Claude, Mitsubishi A-6M Zeke, Kawanishi N-1K Jet, N-1K2 J George, Mitsubishi J-2M Jack, Nakajima J-1N-1S Irving, bombers: Yokosuka P-1Y Francis, Mitsubishi G-4M Betty, Mitsubishi G-3M Nell, torpedo and AMP dive bombers: Aichi D-1A Suzy, Aichi D-3 Aval, Yokosuka D-4Y Judy, Nakajima B-5N Kate, Nakajima B-6N Jill, Yokosuka B-4Y Jean. Float planes and AMP flying boats: Aichi E-1-3A Jake, Yokosuka E-1-4Y Glenn, Aichi E-1-6A Paul, Mitsubishi F-1M Pete, Nakajima E-8N Dave, Kawanishi E-7K Alf, Kawanishi H-8K Emily, Kawanishi H-6K Mavis, Kawanishi N-1K1 Rex, Nakajima A-6M2N Rufi. Reconnaissance planes: Nakajima C-6N Mert. Trainers: Mitsubishi A-5M4K. Transports: Mitsubishi L-4M1 Topsy, Nakajima L-1N1 Thora, Nakajima G-5N Liz. Organization: Carrier aviation flotillas. The elite of the pilots were the carrier-based air groups whose size was dependent on both the mission and type of aircraft carrier that they were on. Fleet carriers had three types of aircraft: fighters, level, torpedo planes, and dive bombers. Smaller carriers tended to have only two types: fighters and dive bombers. The carrier-based Kokutai numbered over 1,500 pilots and just as many aircraft at the beginning of the Pacific War. 11th Air Fleet and land-based air fleets. The IJN also maintained a shore-based system of naval air fleets called Koku Kantai and area air fleets called Homan Kantai, containing mostly twin-engine bombers and seaplanes. The senior command was the 11th Naval Air Fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Nishizo Sukahara. Land-based aircraft provided the bulk of Japan's naval aviation up to the eve of World War II. Strength: each naval air fleet contained one or more naval air flotillas, each with two or more naval air groups. Each naval air group consisted of a base unit and 12 to 36 aircraft, plus 4 to 12 aircraft in reserve. Each naval air group consisted of several Hikotai of 9, 12 or 16 aircraft. This was the main IJN Air Service combat unit and was equivalent to a Chutai in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service. Each Hikotai was commanded by a lieutenant, warrant officer, or experienced chief petty officer, while most pilots were non-commissioned officers. There were usually 4 sections in each Hikotai, and each section with 3 or 4 aircraft. By mid-1944 it was common for a Shotai to have 4 aircraft. There were over 90 naval air groups at the start of the Pacific War, each assigned either a name or a number. The named naval air groups were usually linked to a particular Navy Air Command or a Navy base. They were usually numbered when they left Japan. Naval Air Group identification: and before the 31st of October 1942, place name, Standing Air Group. Numbered name, Special Setting Air Group. And after the 1st of November 1942, numbered name, Category A Air Group as Combatant Unit. Example: 12th Kokutai as Training Group, 121st Kokutai as Reconnaissance Aircraft Group, 762nd Kokutai as Land-Based Torpedo Bomber Group, 1081st Kokutai as Military Airlift Group. Regulation Table. Place name, Category A Air Group as Training Unit, Evaluation Unit. Example: Atsugi Kokutai, Kasumagara Kokutai, Takuma Kokutai, Yokosuka Kokutai. Region name, Category B Air Group as Airbase Guard Unit. Example: Kanto Kokutai, Mariana Kokutai, Hito Kokutai. Squadron identification. And after the 1st of March 1944, Regulation Table. Naval Aircraft Identification System. The IJN had, at the beginning of the Pacific War, 3 aircraft designation systems: the experimental SHI numbers, the type numbering system, and an aircraft designation system broadly similar to that used by the U.S. Navy from 1922 until 1962. Each new design was first given an experimental SHI number, based upon the current Japanese imperial year of reign. The Mitsubishi Zero started its career as Navy Experimental 12 SHI carrier fighter. Upon entering production, the aircraft was given a type number. The Zero was so fully known as Navy Type Zero carrier fighter, as the Zero was accepted in 1940, or 2600 in the Japanese calendar. The aircraft was also given a short designation, consisting of a group of Roman letters and numbers. The first letter indicated the basic type or purpose of the aircraft. Second came a series number indicating the number of major subtypes produced for that type of aircraft. Third was the second letter, which was the manufacturer's code, and included some non-Japanese companies. The fourth in the Navy's sequence, designed or produced by Mitsubishi, while G5 then would be the next attack bomber in sequence, built by Nakajima. Fourth was a number indicating the version of the aircraft. The first production version of the Zero thus became A6M1. Further minor changes were indicated by adding letters after the subtype number as in the type model scheme above. The first 2 letters and the series number remained the same for the service life of each design. In a few cases, when the designed role of an aircraft changed, the new use was indicated by adding a dash and a second type letter to the end of the existing short designation designed by Kawanishi. Fourth version of the design When the plane was equipped primarily as a trooper supply transport, its designation was H-6K4L.